Chapter 2. The rebellion happened after Eden by Simjaza and Azazel at Genesis 6. Paul, John, Jude, and Peter wrote of this rebellion when commenting on the Genesis 6 story of angels interbreeding with mankind. Near-death experiences describe one person brought to Hades and being woven into jagged rocks of a cavern, impaled with the body growing back every 5 minutes or so, and then restarting. Free in hell are the Nephilim and perhaps other angels that fell after the flood, which is described as happening again after the initial influx, as well as some of the original fallen angels. In order to escape the introspective nightmare that is the torture the lead and angels face, they torture humans there and run after them with a lust worse than crack-finding raptors in order to not feel the introspective torture. They are calibrated naturally to be what we know as dope sick and suffer a come down like an introspective nightmare like a severe sickness. Only torturing the souls of the damned relieves that. Azazel is bound in jagged rocks, Enoch 10:4-8. Most likely him and the others can't move and are stuck in that state. The rest of the Nephilim and those not confined like Satan get relief from the torture. What's a lot of different near-death experiencers see reptile-like demons getting high off of torturing people there. Besides the torture they feel, it is the future thought of burning even worse in the second fire, and the short time they have here to accomplish the will of God and feature in Revelation 9 until the final judgment. It says in Revelation 20 that the beast and the false prophet are thrown there, but not Satan, who is thrown in the abyss, or Hades, until after the final judgment when he's thrown in the lake of fire. Rev 20 are the fallen angels thrown there as the 8th king of the 7 kings or heads of the beast at that time. Or is it just the Antichrist or head king and the false prophet who runs the inquisition of the conquered who appears like the little horn of Daniel as Revelation 13's beast from the earth after the beast from the sea establishes his empire as the white horse rider, who with 9 other kings who burn and destroy Jerusalem, Rev 17:16-18, and set up the capital of the empire in Jerusalem, 2 Thess 2:3-4, ruling where he shouldn't be, in the Jerusalem temple. The Rev 11:1-8 scene says this all happens where Jesus was crucified at temple in Jerusalem. The book of Revelation was written around 90-30 years after the destruction of the temple. John saw in his vision the onset of the beast empire and the rule of Antichrist as a rebuilt temple, not a pre-existing temple that was functioning. He saw an evil empire rising and taking over the world and establishing its center at a future rebuilt Jerusalem temple, claiming, like Nero and Domitian did, that he was God. Everyone didn't imagine Constantine's 325 church. They expected them to rule out of Jerusalem. And I think they tried that in a few of the Crusades. This 8th king of the 7-headed beast from the sea that rises from the bottomless pit and kills the 2 witnesses after the beast from sea and earth are all but destroyed from the plagues and trumpets. These are the fallen angels that tried to restore immortality instead of asking God in order to make a name. Revelation 17 verses 7-11. Rev 11, Rev 9, the beast from the abyss. They developed the occult of Babylon system of kingship and theology from this time point at the Tower of Babel after the flood. Nimrod Cush-Menes founded Egypt and Assur and Babylon, the city of Cain in the land of Nod east of Eden in the time of Jared in the Atlantean days before the flood. The weeping for Tammuz in Ezekiel marks the tradition of theology and kingship transfer within the calendar. In many cultures, winter was the time when Penelope left to the underworld to be with Hades. Tammuz is the child of a woman who was with divinity or the fallen angels that bred a savior who established his reign as Marduk the demigod by defeating the old oligarchy or expand the domain of the empire in more ways than area. Also in knowledge and medicine. The king while he's reigning brings all areas into the kingdom's domain, which is called the gates of wisdom or the boundaries of the empire. The tame enough to be able to think as rational species of Nephilim were looking into the spirit realm here, which is already cursed with death, in order to become immortal or produce an immortal heir. Before the demons or Nephilim were sent to Hades and hell, Hades looked like the rich man from the story of Lazarus, or even the wandering of Cain into the Hades. It wasn't torture by Nephilim, only the terrain was cursed, and like Azazel, it was a worse introspective nightmare. Despite the stories from near-death experiencers describing the horror of being torn to shreds over and over again and worse, it doesn't compare to the second fire and the introspective nightmare. In fact, a lot of those people who saw hell and described the same location also described people not being ripped to shreds, but in worse circumstances with demons in control, but not necessarily involved in the cycle of eternal death they are condemned to, but as an audience only laughing, sneering, and being entertained. And the nature of these Nephilim and fallen angels are like dinosaurs in the way they attack and look. The fallen angels when the environment was more sustainable with up to 900-year lifespans before the flood. They can't do what they could do before. The fallen angels only took on material form to lay with the women like a genie in various physical forms. Enoch 19. They were not present on earth like that. They had temples where they would manifest, and the Nephilim ruled for them and either did well or did not do well. They were all evil against God, trying to use their power to restore their original state of immortality as they looked back on Eden before the flood as the good old days. So they disregarded him in a tech race of sorts for dominance over the world in order to harness it, and it developed into Bronze Age city-state structures. They wound up with their spiritual powers, creating a catastrophe when they produced wormwood by mixing compounds to produce a rare element. This is how the waters burst open and rain fell to create the flood. It's how the punctuated equilibrium evolution kicks off as the Bible describes the species of humanity devolving, at least in lifespan. Christianity actually describes evolution. It says we will be raised incorruptible with new physical bodies. The properties of the compound wormwood, which the angels and their offspring and followers made before the flood, was used to create or to stimulate and cause a black hole. The whole thing might have looked like a mini Big Bang, or galaxy sucked into an event horizon and spit out like a mini Big Bang through a white hole. In such a way that everything remained intact, because it was the entire galaxy, not just the Earth. What probably could have been measured was the change in environment and lifespans. This happens later too, when wormwood opens a portal for the beast from the abyss in Revelation 9. This can explain theoretically how what's described as the fall, flood, apocalypse, and final judgment. Less so the creation, where it looks like an entity growing in a womb rather quickly. These fallen angels that tried to make a name for themselves and fulfill the prophecy of Messiah who will crush the head of the snake in death are written in Enoch as being ashamed and horrified by their hybrid children. A lot of them were different breeds of creation besides mankind and were not stable to rule. They had so many years in a lifespan to do this, like 900 years of breeding even. That's a lot of generations of species that can be made. And it backfired on them with the dinosaurs. And they are described as such, it can be argued, as breeds of them. Maybe they were part of the original creation and docile, and even stayed docile after the flood, but a portion of them had the temperament of bloodthirsty raptors. They destroyed everything at the end. Enoch 10:13-14 records like 500 years it took for them to die off and kill each other. The flood happened after that period of death. So they would be in the fossil record, not the fallen angels who were spiritual beings anyway that had no regular physical form other than to mate. It was more than just animals too, they were mixing plants, which is against the Mosaic law later on, probably as a tradition of that myth, Leviticus 19 verse 19. Civilization wound up being able to cross into the realm of death, and see they were screwed, all of them, just like when we hear a lot of the near-death experiences. They all describe the same layouts of heaven and hell. Mayan and Zoroastrian has a grim picture of the afterlife, worse than any descriptions of hell. It shouldn't surprise anyone that a lot of the old priesthoods tried to explore the realm of the dead by using drugs that killed you and brought you back. If they had 900 years as 1 or 2 generations of high-functioning Nephilim that are bred half from the spiritual world, then most likely they saw that they were powerless over death and its location in Hades, with the paradise of heaven described being beyond death and the land of Hades. In the biblical account, that is described as a chasm that separates heaven from hell. Other cultures in the area had accounts of paradise being beyond the depths of Hades, called Elysium Fields. This is almost an identical description for what Jesus said in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. It could be that they all had a similar belief, because all the kingdom's priesthoods were trying to investigate and harness the afterlife. They had temples where the angel would materialize and mate with the human queen, where they would, like the Delhi Greek prophetesses, became pregnant, and everyone paid tribute to their empire as divine. After the flood, nothing could be done beyond multi-pupiled incest possession and no spontaneous births of demigods. But these ancient demigods were all described as evil and unhuman. Enoch 7 describes the bloodthirsty Nephilim exactly like we would describe bloodthirsty dinosaurs today. The story was that wanted to conquer death by embracing it and fighting it and overpowering hell, expecting to reach Elysium fields or cross the chasm, and return with wisdom and knowledge to expand the borders of the empire, adding to the gates of Ishtar, not understanding that death is unconquerable by any kingdom except God's. There, of course, could have been good Genesis 6 Nephilim hybrids for a time until there were only 8 souls left that were described as interested in God and not in power. It's interesting that the power these Nephilim and human kingdoms had wanted, to be able to endure hell and conquer it, is what they do when they torture human spirits like drug fiends trying to outrun the come down in Rev 9. Azazel the Destroyer hasn't been able to get any relief from his introspective torture since the days of Enoch 10. Which was in the time of Jared in the land of Nod east of Eden through the wilderness, which is probably east of Lake Van and Mt. Ararat, an approximate location of where the Euphrates and Tigris might have originated from around Mt. Ararat region, crossing the wilderness of the jagged rocked mountains there into where? Armenia? The city of Enoch existed during the Atlantean generation about 5,000 years ago according to the Septuagint chronology. But it measures like it's older because of the cataclysmic changes within the metrics and laws of our physical environment, rather than the stories that developed after about paradise being out of reach on the other side of Hades. As civilization progresses, that belief becomes a more tamed Homo sapien way to conquer death than a Neanderthal way of thinking where, how can you enjoy paradise if you can't endure hell? What kind of kingdom is that? This was the thinking before Abram was even born that has since been resolved through Christianity. The Greek spoken word or logos and cults like the ancient Ta or even some Native American ones. All the similar perspectives of the ancient monotheistic world came together in Christian monotheistic theology. In fact, every form of monotheism kind of merged into Christianity, ancient Judaism, and Islam. The ancient nomadic gatherers' way was that they traveled by season in a circuit, planting and harvesting in different locations. The Amorites used to travel all throughout Mesopotamia. These are the rural peoples of the ancient international city centers in the Levant. The first civilization would have been nomadic and would have understood the spoken word and the presence of a being that existed before and outside of creation. After the flood, humanity tried to build their empire and conquer death by being divine by rewriting the ancient Genesis account into anthropomorphized beings that represent the oligarchy. They did it in Greece with the 2 religions for the wise and then the pagan one for the masses. They did it in Egypt too. They do it in the Catholic Church with the hidden pagan Janus worship of duality. They have a secret layer that interprets the signs and rituals of the main religion differently than the majority. They did this for diplomacy internationally, having an elite cult that worshipped dinosaur bones and explained this to people that had migrated away but shared similarities in ancestral history. They worshipped the dinosaur bones as a secret religion that most people didn't know existed. They wanted to get power from them in order to defeat death and become immortal and be like Azazel wanted to be, like God to mankind in his temple. The strange thing is that if dinosaurs are most likely being described in Enoch 7, or even fossils of them, because according to Enoch 10, the Nephilim killed each other off rather than being taken directly to hell, then a lot of those fossils are how we have oil and all plastic today, and is responsible for a lot that makes up these modern civilizations and economic empire that we all live in. What they did was they had a queen at Babel who was producing heirs and saying they were divine when they were not. The old king died, adding to the breadth of the empire known as the Gates of Ishtar, or the Gates of Wisdom. The old king's wife ruled until the baby was born, supposedly a reincarnation of the king. This is the weeping period of Tammuz, which syncs with the season of winter, spring, like the birth of a new heir or a time to expand the empire's domain with war or knowledge and other deeds that contribute to the wisdom of the empire. The story syncs with the calendar year to reflect their religious beliefs, as well as how their succession of kingship works. What wound up happening after the symbolic story of Nimrod and Semiramis is the gates of Ishtar became the woman symbolically. Meaning the city became the woman who raised the leader who sacrificed his life for the empire and then reincarnated in another male. The Madonna with the woman holding the sun in pagan religions symbolizes that relationship between wisdom and power. Marduk, Tiamat, and Tammuz symbolize this reincarnation of the divine. The wound that healed is an ancient Babylonian term used in Revelation 13 that described the succession of Marduk through reincarnation. The weeping for Tammuz is the period when he is wounded, and then the healing of that wound is at the new year, which might have been spring, before the divine ruler reincarnated. After the flood, in that age we are in even now, mankind deified the oligarchy as the MT Olympus or MT Hermon, which was really MT Ararat, where the angels would have descended in Cain's time at least. Eden is described as being at the start of the Tigris and Euphrates River. Cain went east of Eden in the land of Nod, that's by Lake Van and MT Ararat. The terrain there is rough until you cross into Armenia. That's the relative location of Eden, at the beginning of the rivers, not at the end near the Persian Gulf. So the original hunter-gatherer nomadic lifestyle, where they could have ridden horses from South Africa to Korea and used Stonehenge as a type of calendar to know where was good to move to, was arguably monotheistic, believing in a spoken word and triune function of a creator that uses word and spirit in creation. Our earliest ancestors moved to the rhythm of the seasons instead of trying to harness the revelation of the seasons with magic, the manipulation of what's revealed for the self-defined by the Esoterica channel on YouTube, if I can remember right. This was during the time of Seth, Cain, and Methuselah. It makes more sense like Cleopatra painted over the ancient hieroglyphs, and how the ancient world generally was by altering documents as a sign of divine power, that they altered the Genesis account during the Bronze Age, orally even. When we look at the Native American tribes in the West, it's easy to see their religion promotes one spirit and harmonization with rather than dominating and controlling the elements and nature. Native Americans and ancient Neolithic nomads wouldn't have put names to sky and anthropomorphized them into gods. If you compare the Genesis account to the other accounts, they are similar except one is anthropomorphized into gods as sky god, water god, and land god, or as Ie Enki or Anu Apsu. Then they have their ancestors as descending from these gods or being a reincarnation of them to legitimize their rule and empire. So they have in China around 2500 BC at the same time as the Septuagint version of Genesis 5 list that attributes divinity to earthly ancestors who became legendary. An example would be to recall the story of Lincoln as a mortal who ruled for 35k years through the following human vessels. Genesis account has the lifespans long, but doesn't call them God or even angels. It doesn't make logical sense for any god except one, because if power is shared with the other, the divine quality of all-powerful and a few others erodes the divinity logically. They make the divine above as the corrupted earth below. They sell out the logic of the divinity to promote their special interests in ruling. And a lot of those inhabitants all over the various kingdoms blatantly ignored the logical fallacy of their divine rule. The ruling elite at that time used divinity as a symbol of power as they tricked their population into compliance and obedience with blatant contempt for the masses. The nobility would justify their high positions in life with a false divinity. The secret of the educated and elite in those days was a secret religion that worshipped dinosaur bones. An old story of fallen angels, Nephilim, and Babel in search of immortality by conquering death. Nothing but bloodshed in the Atlantean world. It was a further slip from immortality rather than any progression. Once they harmonized the kingdoms out of those Kingdom 1 reigns. They didn't see history as a chronology of empires rising and falling. They only saw their own and the few others around. In the way they feel like the rebuilding of the temple will force the second advent, or the way they see that as a secret commandment like a Gnostic, and the way they try and attain that as non-Jews who have a different understanding of what that temple is, was the way they felt if they harmonized all the kingdoms into one world kingdom. That's the story of Babel. They probably got in an argument over whose tribe was the leader or king. Things naturally fall apart. Even today, they are trying to become immortal to some degree. The Nephilim rulers wanted to be able to die and conquer death by living again. They would need to die and go to Hades and overtake and charge paradise in order to get the power to reign over and not be affected by Hades, then come back to Earth. This happens with the reappearance of Azazel, who takes on various forms with the angels of Revelation 9 and 16, with their Nephilim locust army as Hades is opened up here on Earth through a wormwood portal. That's the main outline to the Atlantean world that existed before the flood and after the fall. An ancient legend of the ancient world. But how can this all be explained scientifically, even if it's in the realm of unproved theory and fiction? What if a scientific rational answer existed that couldn't be proven wrong or right? Fine-tuning of the universe, punctuated equilibrium evolutionary theory, and Big Bang wormwood wormholes are the answer in today's science fiction terms. That is if it can be proven fiction. Either way, it stays a theory until it can be proven fact using the scientific method, which puts the genre more into the fantasy spectrum. Heaven is not an individual experience. Everyone here while we are alive, from bums on the street to rulers and celebrities, will shortly be dead, and a whole new generations of inhabitants will be on the planet. The ones of us that make it will be a specific generation. We will be able to meet every human being alive now. That makes it to heaven. 30 to 40% of everyone goes to heaven if most people go to hell. In heaven, it would make a difference which generation you met first. It seems like fellowship is a big theme there. It makes sense that each relative in the family tree would introduce you to that generation. Note on Enoch and KJV only. Those who don't want to use the book of Enoch don't have to. Gen 6 1 Corinthians 11 verse 10 2 Peter 2:4 Jude 1 verse 6 is good enough to define Rev 9 angels as these angels, they just go unnamed. You can look at it as a contemporary story from another culture like the ones who have a flood narrative in common. Chapter 3. Chapter 2.